Hello, welcome to my Pakal lecture. This is part of my archaeology of famous figures in history that we've actually got archaeology for. Pakal, Central America, the first image you'll be seeing in front of you, Alberto Ruz. I've taken the unusual step because I didn't actually record these couple of little paragraphs, which I'm going to read to you now in the final lecture that I did about Pakal. I thought I'd add them to you here and now. Anyway, I'm KARL-JAMES Langford, and thanks everybody for continually watching my videos. So this is actually, these three little paragraphs are actually from great excavations by the wonderful archaeologist John Roma in his publication The History of Archaeology. I love this guy to bits and all his work. It's one of those people who inspired me into archaeology in the 80s anyway, and he's still with us, which is great. Here we go. What he says about Pakal. Mars attacks Pakal and Tutankhamun. Anyway, throughout most of my lecture that you'll hear on this, you'll hear me making comparisons between Pakal and Tutankhamun. Here we go. In 1949, a marvellous discovery at Palenque, deep in the rainforests of Yucatan in Mexico, revived many of the traditional theories of the diffusionism of cultures from the old world to the new world. Interject. Diffusionism basically means that ancient Egypt, everything evolves from ancient Egypt, and all the pyramids in Asia and Central America and all the rest of it all evolve from ancient Egypt. That's what diffusionism basically means, or out of Africa. Today we know that, for example, people are determining their values in the past. For example, we've got Orkney. There's no links with Egypt there, so everything's sort of developing. Central America, there's no real links with Egypt. They're developing their own pyramids using their own mindset, otherwise known as determinism. Anyway, back to John Roma. Excavating a stairway deep inside a jungle pyramid, Mexican archaeologist Alberto Ruz, who's in the image in front of you, found a burial chamber as grand as many in the pharaoh's tombs in Egypt, and untouched since the days of burial. Nowadays, this celebrated tomb is believed to have been made for Pakal, a monarch from the 700s. Much given to erecting stone monuments, including parts of the so-called palace that housed Stevens and Catherwood during their visit to Palenque in 1839. So that's all well said. I quote that throughout the lecture, but listen to this. So the image that you're going to see in front of you in a few moments is actually the green death mask of Pakal. Pakal's death mask, quoting back to John Roma, on the other hand, of a light green jade is the colour of young maize plant, which they termed the maize the dancing prince. So his eternal destiny is personal, physical and organic. The tree of life drawn as growing from his chest on his portrait on the coffin lid. The first plant in the world underlies this same organic concept of the Mayan universe. This was a hostile, fertile, ever-changing place. Pakal's destiny is one with the plants and animals of the rainforest. Life and death, growing and dying, both in nature and in humankind, is one. Human sweat and tears, milk and semen. The Mayans describe as the dew and nectar, as the very sap of plants and trees. The earth, they say, is warmed by bones, and in acts of self-mutilation and human sacrifice, they offer human blood to it. And indeed, this ever-growing, ever-changing forest is a harsh environment. Without due attention, you will bleed from pricks and scratches and the attentions of animals, reptiles and insects. What a great introduction this is to my Pakal lecture today, folks. Anyway, another quote from John Roma. Well, not so much of a quote. We'll start off anyway. Though few people even noticed the great grand theories of the 1800s diffusionism were effectively killed off within a few years of the discovery of Pakal's tomb. What is John Roma talking about? He's talking about radio carbon dating. So in other words, we're now starting to see at the same time this tomb's being excavated. Willard Libby in America, 1951, he brings forth radiocarbon dating. So the bones were able to see radiocarbon dated at Pakal's tomb. That technology was not available at the time of the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Anyway, hopefully you enjoy this lecture and keep listening. And anyone out there, I would love to get 600 subscribers by the end of the year. Please subscribe, enjoy this video, and like. Thank you very much.
Mexico City, isn't it? Mexico?
Yeah, and the mine.
Oh, and the mine.
Well, they were farther out. I mean, that red dot is, I think.
Today we'll be looking at to be honest with you, the figure we're looking at today, Pakal, is to me more important than the insignificant, pointless pharaoh Tutankhamun, because Pakal was actually a great leader, and we've actually in 1948 they found the tomb of Pakal, and by 1952 they actually found the body. It was a guy by the name of Alberto Ruz. Pakal is spelled P-A-C-A-L. So Pakal, you know, when we look at Tutankhamun was somebody who achieved nothing in his life. He was somebody that really wasn't fit to be a pharaoh, and he didn't build any great monuments and stuff. But he's the only pharaoh that we've got has actually survived, you know, ancient Egypt. Whereas Pakal was a great leader, and for 68 years of his reign did achieve great things. So I think in history actually Pakal should be the one who's remembered. But if I asked you in the room if you'd ever heard of Pakal, would any of you say yes?
No.
Exactly. So this is the biased nature of history and archaeology, where you know, somebody like Tutankhamun's found in Egypt by a Western archaeologist. Pakal is the location of where Pakal's buried in 1948, 1949 is located by a Mexican archaeologist, and 99% of people you speak to have never ever heard of him, when everyone's heard of Tutankhamun. So the site where we're looking at, where Pakal was buried, laid to rest, is a place known as Palenque. Palenque was found by two explorers, two antiquarians, two artists, one called Catherwood and the other one called Stevens. And these two individuals, the interesting backdrop about Palenque is they found the great city of Palenque by complete accident. Then they bought it off the authorities for $50, and the plan was to take the whole city of Palenque apart and to rebuild it somewhere near Washington, D.C. It's good that they didn't do that, because if they had done that, the body of Pakal would never have been found. Because where Pakal was buried was actually in the great temple of the inscriptions at Palenque, and he was basically buried sort of underneath ground level, so they'd have demolished the temple, and they probably would have missed where he was actually buried, along sort of a staircase leading into the ground, a bit like an ancient Egyptian pyramid. But Palenque itself, Pakal, has all the riches of somebody who was left and never interfered with. Now, one thing when we think about Tutankhamun's tomb, I believe, and lots of people believe, that Tutankhamun's tomb was completely intact before Howard Carter found it, years before the official opening in 1922. But this tomb itself had never ever been touched, and it almost seems as if the tomb was lost in history. But Alberto Ruz did have a bit of a lead in finding this. It's probably the local people knew where he was buried, but didn't want to tell anyone if you had white skin and we were from the West. But this guy seemed to tick all the boxes. And this by far is a far greater discovery than the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. So this itself is one of the great temples at Palenque. This is not the one
that Pakal's buried underneath. Before you mention it, Glenda, this site has been written extensively about by Von Daniken and Graham Hancock, and I'm sure you watch their things. But we won't talk about Von Daniken and Graham Hancock yet. They will come into play when I want them to come into play. Yeah, I have been watching one or two of those programs. My head went. Anyway, so you can imagine this site itself, when it's found, is completely under the tropical rainforest that surrounds it today, and you can actually miss these sites. You can just walk past them and you not know they're there because the thick root systems of the trees and all the rest of it, you can completely miss it. And lots of these sites have been completely missed. Think about Angkor Wat in Cambodia, and think about Angkor Wat being covered with dense mangroves and not being able to see it. That's what we're talking about. So when Alberto Ruz is there, this site was found 110 years earlier, and the great woodland and tropical rainforest itself is actually started retaking over some of the buildings. And this leads us with an interesting problem. Basically the leaders of some of the South American countries are actually saying, if you look at the archaeology, you will see that at one time in the past, this landscape was occupied by up to 100 million people, right? And they must have lived somewhere. And all those tropical rainforests that you're seeing in front of you didn't exist 1,000 years ago, and they didn't exist 1,500 years ago, because up to this landscape, particularly Central America, was occupied by millions and millions of people. And they're right. And then the presidents of these countries, particularly the president of Amazon, saying, well, we're clearing the trees and one day it'll come back because it's happened in the past. And he's got a very good point, because it did happen in the past. This landscape, the Mayan landscape itself, it's likely that 80% of the trees that are there today weren't there 1,200 years ago, because they've been completely cleared for agriculture. So we can't tell these people in these countries what to do, because in the past there were large tracts of this landscape that didn't have trees where you have trees today. So archaeology itself is being used for political ends and political reasons, and we don't need to discuss about Brazil and tropical rainforests. Fact matter is we should be growing our own trees and looking after ourselves instead of lecturing other people. Because history and archaeology is very different from one location to another location. But going back to the facts of this, that Alberto Ruz, being a Mexican archaeologist by adoption and a Mexican archaeologist by his lineage, this was a man who was seen to be great by finding the jade mask and the jade ornamentation that was found with this great figure Pakal. So looking now, this mask is a mask that I'm sure some of you have seen before. And jade itself is probably going to be traded across the Pacific Ocean, and this jade, it's a face that is probably very much close to how Pakal would have looked, to be honest with you. It's not a face of a god. It's the face of somebody who's had as much influence on the planet as our present-day Queen Elizabeth I. That's how important Queen Elizabeth II. That's how important Pakal is, not only in the past but is today. And the stories associated with the finding of Pakal are very similar to the stories that Howard Carter would say with the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. Tutankhamun's tomb in a bigger space, but really not so much bigger. There's two differences between Howard Carter and Alberto Ruz. Obviously, forget about the colour of the skin. The difference is that Alberto Ruz is seen as one of their own, where Howard Carter isn't seen to be of Egyptian descent. And the points are, as Alberto Ruz, as an archaeologist, is deified as a god of archaeology in Central America, which is great. Howard Carter has almost been forgotten. And he was forgotten because after his spending 10 years in the tomb of Tutankhamun, he ended up being an antique dealer in the streets of London. He never became a sir, he never completed his report, and he was never given that level of respect. And you can see that there's great parallels in the discoveries of these two figures in history. Okay, we'll put Tutankhamun on as a great figure now, because he's the only pharaoh to actually survive in any way, state or form. We think we found Ramesses, maybe not. We think we found Seti the First and all the rest of it, but we found their tombs, but we found nothing in them. These two individuals that we're talking about, we found their tombs, and we know who they were. So, there is Alberto Ruz, and there he is actually in the sarcophagi area of this jade mask figure of Pakal. He's very much hands-on. The lid was actually directly tight on top of the sarcophagus, which is sort of, you go in there and it's a level surface, and the sarcophagus lid was placed onto it, and then you've got decoration in the tomb, which you'll see. So this is actually propped up, so you can actually work in there. Do you imagine if that frigging collapsed on it? Yeah. He would have had to have lived in the little hole where, probably having no oxygen, and he probably died after a few hours if they couldn't get the lid off it. But that's one of my pet hates. We've got the trip to Cornwall and Devon, and we're going to be going down one of the mines. I wouldn't be going down there.
Why
The sense of suffocation. You won't be going down there, Anne, because didn't you?
I did.
You didn't go down Grimes' graves. Why not?
It was scary. It was white and clear, and this big long ladder.
Well, to be honest, I didn't think I had the stamina.
I thought you went down with us.
I didn't have the stamina to climb back up. I could get down there, but it was like that, you know.
There was a ladder, yeah.
Anyway, moving on.
Yeah.
So Alberto Ruz, and along here there are sort of representations of the cosmos along the large sarcophagus lid. There are some cartouches associated with Pakal, and on the lid itself is this thing that von Daniken spoke about. But we will mention von Daniken, but I'll completely dismiss it.
Twice now.
I know.
Did they call them cartouches as well as the Egyptians?
Eric von Daniken. The Egyptians called it. The Egyptians called them cartouches, and we can call them cartouches as well. You can refer to the written script of the Mayan and the Aztecs as hieroglyphics as well. It's just one of those words.
Okay.
Well, it's the codices of the Mayan, which is a bit of a mouthful, so just call them hieroglyphics. So this itself might be what they found around Palenque is actually different representations of Pakal. So he must be buried somewhere close near. Or then again, there's actually quite a few temples there. So how they managed to find him in the Temple of Inscriptions, I probably believe he probably had a bit of information. But he did take 4 years to actually get down into his burial chamber, because it was so full of crap, right, that it took them 4 years to dig it all out. Just think of that. But then again, they only excavated it for about six weeks a year because of the conditions within the tropical rainforest. There's only certain times of the year you can actually work without your skin peeling off because it's so hot. So this is what Catherwood and Stevens felt when they were actually clearing the temples. Catherwood and Stevens nearly went blind doing it. They were losing their sight because of the diseases they were picking up in 1839. When I was going to go to Brazil with my friend Fernanda, I had all the injections and everything. I had rabies, typhoid, everything.
Yellow fever.
Malaria, meningitis. I had more injections than I was a pincushion. I didn't actually eventually go to Machu Picchu because I met a woman and Ended up getting her pregnant, and I didn't go. That's happened to you, hasn't it, George?
As you do, Robin.
Has that happened to you, George? You want to do something in life and you get a woman pregnant?
And that's it.
Oh, many times.
Exactly. See, there you go. A good representation of Pakal, and one. Notice the ears. They've been. He's got earrings, and we'll look at what that means in a short while. But what I would like to do is, before we look at a little bit more of the information, let's look at some of these cartouches. So a number of these cartouches around, that is said to represent Pakal, but the ones that are more specific, that actually look like Pakal, this head here, looking very similar to the jade mask with a big nose, and this as well, this is his full name, Kanich Jana Pakala, or Pakal. But the ones that actually look very much similar to Pakal are these ones here. That's another. He had lots of cartouches. Somebody in history with a lot of cartouches must be rather important. So there we go. There's Pakal there. Pakal. So these are all cartouches representing Pakal. Now there is that. You know, I said there was two similarities, right, between Tutankhamun and this guy, right? There is a big similarity. Tutankhamun's mother reigned over Egypt before him, right? And guess who reigned over the Mayan world before Pakal? His mother. Now that is really interesting, isn't it? And the reason why it's really interesting, Egypt is not as macho when you think about it, because we've got Nefertiti and Cleopatra and all the rest of it, right? But when you think about Central America, there's almost women never existed. They don't seem to exist in history in Central America. You don't hear about them. You hear about the priests, you hear about the Jaguar warriors, you hear about Montezuma, you hear about Pakal, you hear about the warriors. Very rarely do you hear about women collecting yams in the field, or whether they had any purpose at all.
Amazonian women. Oh yeah. No.
Shut up. Oh, they got really nice breasts as well. Oh, right, I'm sorry. I'm craving for Michelle.
I'm just wondering, what was the name of that place? The Pakal.
Palenque.
Oh, Palenque.
Anyway, moving on. Anne's taken us completely off the plot. Mind you, it's not unusual. And look at that there. We will actually come to back to this, okay? We will come back to this. And not self-mutification, what's the word? Mutilation, that's the one. Couldn't get the words out. Self-mutilation, there we go. Look at that. What's that?
It's got lumps in his ears.
His own ears.
Self-mutilation, yeah, there it is. This is all jade. And if you notice there, you've got some nice earrings hanging down as well. He would have had some kind of headdress, right? But that's obviously all decayed and gone away. But look at that there.
He hasn't got those things around his ears.
Well, all right then. Hang on a minute. I'll phone him now. Hiya, Pakal. yeah, all right then. Yeah. See, it was instant to Pakal then. It's basically self-mutilation. This is a representation of a great leader. That's why they're there.
Yeah, because it's like bravery, isn't it?
Exactly.
Did he hang him on his ears, or did he?
They're actually good through his lobes.
Well, the pointy bit is, but the square bit is sort of.
He's not real, that's a mask.
No. Actually, you see the levels of self-mutilation in some of the portrayals. Thank you very much. So if we actually go down the body as well, if we go down to the hands. One thing I'm a bit peed off with is that the body itself, they've left the bones in the burial chamber, which is thumbs up. They've made a replica set of all the jade stuff to go with Pakal, right? And the original stuff is in the museum. And you're thinking, yeah. So personally, I would leave all the stuff with Pakal and then display the. Oh, anyway, forget it. But one interesting thing is with this is that look at the fact that he's got each of the digits has actually got a jade ring on, and he's holding jade in his hands. And why is he holding jade in his hands? jade is life. Jade is life. Green is life. The tree of life. Everything to do with green is life. And where you talk about the myths, the foundation myths of say ancient Egypt, right? And I'm going to say it as brazen as this: where you see the stories about Egyptian gods masturbating, and the semen spreads across the planet, creating men and animals and all the rest of it. It's a completely different creation myth than the Mayan, for example. The creation myth for the Mayan is the tree. The tree gives life. The tree brings forth life. And when you pass on, interesting play on words, when you pass on, you go green, right? You're wrapped by the roots of the trees, and then you're absorbed by the tree, you're recycled, and you become life again. Right. Now the Aztecs believed something else. The Aztecs believed in the inverted tree of life, when in fact the inverted tree of life would actually go into the ground where there was heaven and earth, where the roots would be up here. If you think of Norfolk and the trees down in Norfolk laid there in the Mesolithic, Neolithic period. So you've got the roots sticking up in the air, and you've got the branches going into the ground. That's in Aztec mythology. But in this mythology, the tree is meant to exude life. The trees actually exude life, and they give life. So and if you look as well here, that a tiny bit. Now, don't think what this is. A tiny bit of jade, not representing as phallus or anything else like that. Just a nice little touch of jade for whatever reason. But jade is really powerful. And why they've got his body in red in the museum displaying this, I don't know, because that's more of an Aztec colour. So anyway, so just that sort of differentiation between these different worlds. So what I'd like to do now, I'm gonna read you some stuff, okay? And maybe if I share my screens, if I have two screens, right, you can have a look at a few images, right? And hopefully I don't screw up again. Oh no, I have screwed up. Never mind. It's your fault, Bill. It's Bill and his computers. It is. Right. So you go. Change resolution of the screen. Where's my screens gone? I want to share screens. Oh, nobody knows what I'm doing. Okay. Shares. Yeah. What I want. I want to keep that illustration. I'll do my notes, but I'm. Oh, display. That's it. Display. Here we go. Display. So I'm having a. Multiple displays. There you go. Oh, there we go. Well, I have two screens now. There you go. Get in there. Duplicates. There we go. We want show two. That's right.
I usually slam mine across the side.
But you know what I've just done? I should have done that one. I'm seeing something different on mine than you are, see? Bingo. That's what I need. So what we'll do, we'll have a look at that image there. There he is, and I can do my notes. The magic of technology, George, isn't it?
Of course.
George is impressed. Or depressed, one or the other. Right, okay. I don't know where Rob is today. I just thought he'd be with us. I thought he would be with us today. And our strange French broke Henri. Right, Alberto Ruz, as we know, is a Mexican archaeologist, and he was massive in his pre-Columbian Meso-American culture. Died in 1979, and he's actually buried at Palenque, overlooked basically by the building, that the tomb of Pakal. He's actually still there. So how amazing is that? You know, how amazing is that? The guy you found is there, and he's over there, and it's just like two separate tombs. It's great. So anyway, Luz with his lineage, he went to college in Havana, Cuba, where he learned about the impact that, westernization is having on the landscape. So it gives him a good sort of setting to be an archaeologist, to go out there and actually discover some of this stuff. and actually respect it in the vein it's meant to be respected. So he's very much a socialistic archaeologist, a student of Karl Marx, actually. He's a Marxist archaeologist, which is fine because he's able to understand what the lowest level of civilization is about. Now, 1949, people are still up themselves looking at great emperors and stuff. Nobody's looking at the little person. So what would usually happen is somebody find a burial chamber in South Wales and they'd say that burial chamber is for a king. They would basically say, right, you know, we're only interested in excavating the main stuff. Forget about the peasants, right? And that same attitude meant that we didn't know who built the bloody pyramids because nobody was interested in who built the pyramids. They always said it was built by slaves because nobody actually went to actually look who built it. And then they find all the villages of the people who built the pyramids and they weren't slaves at all. Because this is the problem with how people think in archaeology. They can get very blinkered and very addled by one-track minds. So I can't have one track here, to be honest.
And you said pre-Columbian what?
Pre-Columbian civilization, pre-Columbian Meso-American civilization.
Meso-American.
Yeah. What's wrong?
Just don't leave the door open.
Just like your mouth.
So pre-Columbian is pre-Spanish invasion.
It's pre-Spanish invasion, yeah. Pre-Spanish invasion. So after the unexpected death of his boss, Miguel Fernandez, in 1945, Ruz had carte blanche. He became the new head of what is called the National Institute of Anthropology and History in Mexico. And he decided that one of his jobs was to really understand Palenque, put Palenque on the map, restore it, conserve it, the palace at Palenque, and then there was the Temple of Inscriptions. So what we need to do, I will take you to the Temple of Inscriptions. Right, hang on. There, that's the Temple of Inscriptions. Good, isn't it? Well, okay, right. Sure, just think outside the box. We're just talking nonsense, right? If you're gonna bury somebody, you're gonna bury them in this sort of building, maybe, yeah, because it looks massively more impressive than this building at Palenque. But however, this is the greatest building at Palenque because it's completely intact and it's seen as the symbol for this type of Central American civilized world, for example. How he knew it was there is a mystery. But anyway, he basically it said that he went inside this building, the usual story, and he looked down at the floor and there was a slab that had drilled holes in it. Shut up, Bill. Had drilled holes in the limestone slab, right? Perfectly regular drilled holes in the limestone slab, and he thought that those holes must have been ventilation holes for something. I'm going to lift up that stone. And do you know what? Nobody had ever thought of that. Nobody had ever thought of that actually at all. And that's where the journey begins. So anyway, we'll look at a little bit more detail in a short while on that, but we'll just sort of overview. He found the entrance to Pakal, hidden beneath the Temple of the Inscriptions. So yeah, he's got to go, you can imagine, right? Yeah. These narrow steps leading from the top all the way down here into solid rock, right? Claustrophobia, getting claustrophobic, yeah. Going a bit further down, 4 years of work, staircase, really narrow, claustrophobic, right? Then he finds it. And apparently it's rather stifling and hot. Every stone they lift up, they're going to be very wary of the creatures that might be underneath.
Snakes.
Exactly. Snakes and all the other beasties that are actually there. Tarantulas, snakes, bingo. So you'll be very careful what's there, every single stone that they move. Alberto tells us that nobody died, thankfully. But again, it took a number of years for them to find this. You know, this is not the same civilization as the Aztecs. The Aztecs, the civilization of the Maya, the height of the Mayan civilization collapses in about the year, smack on, in the year 799 AD. Pakal lived from, he was born in 603 AD. We can tell all that from the Mayan calendars and codices. And if he started to reign at the age of 12. So by 615, he's the leader of the Mayans. Similarities between Tutankhamun? He was a babe when he became leader as well. He was slightly younger than Pakal, but there's another similarity. Right? But the big difference is this. The big difference is this. If Tutankhamun had, say, lived 80 years as long as Pakal, right, what would have happened in Egypt? Would he have brought back his father's monotheism, right? Would Egypt have had all its gods removed? And because Tutankhamun lived 80 years, there was only going to be one religion in Egypt, and we'd have had an early start to Christianity. That's another story altogether. The model for Christianity is based on Archanatum, basically, with the one God, the one God. Anyway, so and then he lived until the age of 80. So 100 years after that, the Mayan civilization collapses. So this is a very important person. So I need to get on to my. No, that's the Aztecs. So, a few key facts. Born on at 1015 in the year 603 on the 21st of March. Died at 6:40 in the evening in the year 683 on the 26th of August.
Julian or Gregorian?
Shut up. Mayan. That's it. It's got to be Mayan, right? So what I'm going to do now. So iconography of the lid. Oh, here we go. Right, shut up, Glenda, before you even say anything. We know you're going to say something. We know you've seen this now, so shut up. Right, let's have the lid. Where's the bloody lid of the? Hang on. Oh, there it is. There. Right. What is going on there? Right,
There's
Shut up!
he's actually driving the space.
Shut up!
No,
In the middle.
you force it to start.
He's piloting the spaceship.
There you go.
Oh.
There you go. And there's the tree of life. Yeah, you remember. Yeah, you knew this. I knew it. I knew you'd seen this one. Right. So, iconography of Pakal's sarcophagus lid. You've got a good memory, haven't you? The large carved stone sarcophagus lid in the Temple of Inscriptions is a unique piece of classic Mayan art. Iconographically, however, it is closely related to the panels that are found elsewhere within the temples of Palenque. Around the edges of the lid, which is around here, sort of side on, there are cosmological signs, as I've said, including those for the sun, the moon, and the stars, and some heads of named noblemen of varying rank on his tomb, which is a bit strange. The central image is that of a cruciform worldly tree. So there you go, that is the cruciform worldly tree, a Mayan cruciform worldly tree. But cruciform, it's a cross, cruciform, right? And then basically what you've got then is beneath Pakal, who's shown here. Look at his nose, yep, very similar to the green mask. He's basically, beneath Pakal is one of the heads of a celestial two-headed serpent viewed formally, right? So basically, one of the heads of a two-headed serpent. There it is. There you go. There. Eyes. There you go. And then both the king and the serpent head on which he seems to rest are framed by the open jaws of a funerary serpent. So basically, these are the open jaws. Got it? Are we with it still? Good. I'm glad we are. And then a common iconographical device for signaling entrance or residence into the realms of the dead or the afterlife. Bingo. Shrub you. The king himself wears the attributes of a maize god. Basically got sort of maize, on his head. In particular, a turtle ornament on the piece. Turtles are very sort of important to the Central American world. If you want me to tell it, right? A turtle there's nothing in the sea, right? And suddenly the turtle swims in the sea, right? And then the turtle becomes the land and puts his roots down and everyone lives on it. We've done it. The king and basically interpretation of the lid has raised controversy. And this is where the controversy goes. They say that is actually the Milky Way on top. And then we chuck in von Daniken. Von Daniken says in the Chariot of Gods that if we put it side on now, we can see it a bit more.
Yeah, you've got to put it sideways. No, the other way. That's it.
Here we go. There he is. That is actually a spaceship.
Yeah.
And these are...
It's
Yeah.
as if he's riding a motorbike.
Yeah.
He's controlling something.
Go on.
Sing on the guitar.
Carry on.
And he's he's got all his controls in front of him and he's
Yeah.
steering off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rocket.
Where's
Boom.
that?
That
Two-headed
picture down the
serpent.
bottom is, wheels.
It's a two-headed serpent, but there's one head there.
Yeah, the greys.
Yeah.
I only see, it looks like sheep's head.
No, it says a two-headed serpent, but they're only showing one.
Oh. Who says that?
That's in my notes.
Oh,
Look,
okay.
I'll say it again. It's showing a two-headed... Right. It's showing one of the heads of a two-headed serpent.
Oh, okay.
I
Right.
mean, look though, you can see what he's doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, these are the booster rockets, and there's the flames.
And there's a little spaceship.
Yeah.
So what year?
Why
I
are
like
you
his little
sitting like
tights.
that without doing that?
What
His little
era,
skirt.
Carl?
He's got a little
This is probably produced smack on the date of his death.
680.
Yeah.
683, yes. Smack bang. There you go. Right. Oh, okay, Glenn. There. If you do look around, you do see carvings on stones in Central and North America and South America of alien type doodads, right? But I'm gonna say that Pakal is a human being, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
What are
Who's
those two?
associated with interstellar people?
There's four things that are shaped like that. They're straight and
Where?
they curve. That thing. and
These?
things. They're like little. I don't know.
That could represent maize, actually. So if you actually get this back in, what we'll do, we'll have one more doodad effort, then we'll take a break because George is
I don't know.
I don't know. So there you go. That there is the cruciform. Actually, go on, Glenda, say it.
No,
A little head.
Say it, Glenda. There.
there's a person.
Yeah, with a helmet on.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but you can see him everywhere.
Yeah.
Did they have crosses back then? Were they Christian or something? The Lions? Did they like?
Yeah,
Well, they
but-
weren't Christian. No.
They
No,
like
but-
crosses?
Yeah, you had crosses everywhere.
Crosses everywhere. Yeah. Crosses everywhere.
Everywhere.
Actually,
Everywhere.
you're only looking for a cross, because basically that isn't the cross. You're only looking for one. If you look, it's got sides on it and a piece over the top.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
You're only looking for a cross. 'cause
You're only looking for a
we-
cross.
We want to see crosses.
It's like looking for a Michelle. I find one. She's got a load, because what she said it's time of the month coming, so what she does, she buys loads of yogurts, puts them in the fridge, and
Ready
then,
to throw it
yeah,
down.
that's right, she gets them ready. Do you know the worst thing I ever did with Michelle? She said, can you go out and buy me a mobile phone? I did,
Oh, no,
right?
you tell
Yeah.
us that, yeah.
But I-
Listen to this, Henry.
Yeah, so I wandered in, I put the mobile phone on the table, here's your new mobile phone, Michelle, right? And she goes out into the kitchen and she has a phone call on her other mobile phone and it really pisses her off. So she comes in her room now, gets his brand new mobile phone that I bought there, right? I'm sat there and she picks it, she goes, it smashes her against the wall, right? And I said, I just bought that for you. And she said, oh, I'm not upset with you.
And then throws the yogurt at him.
Yeah, do you know what I mean?
Oh, you should get along well.
Yeah, we get along well, yeah.
What are you watching, Ancient Aliens?
Yeah, I think I am, yeah.
I'll
I've
tell
been,
you what, though,
yeah.
Carl, you can half learn a lot about different places.
Yeah, you can. I got to be honest with you.
Yeah.
They're really good, actually.
Yeah.
They're really good. So what, I can have one more doodad a minute, and if I can just
Do that, eh?
Do-da, 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 do. A bit more information. Okay, so he's you could see during his 68 years, somebody who's able to extend the sense of what being a Mayan is about by the types of monumental structures that he's having erected and inscriptions. You'll note that those great pharaohs of Egypt lasted a long time, and they were able to build many monuments to them, and that would aid them into going into heaven as true gods should do with all these temples built on the planet. So what we see about this individual is that there are other Pakals. There's a Pakal the second, but obviously not as great as him. And in his early life, just a little bit of early life, in the first 2 years of his life, there's a violent takeover of Palenque by a neighbouring people, right? And Palenque was attacked by a state known as Can. But eventually the Mayans had the upper hand after the city being sacked and all the rest of it. Pakal remembered all this, and he basically went on a sense of rebuilding the Mayan world, sort of conquering other states and all the rest of it, and building new roads. He built lots of roads, for example. So what we're going to do now, we're going to take a break. Are there any questions? No, darlings?
When you showed that first picture of the first building,
Yeah.
the really pretty one,
Yeah.
then you showed the basic one. When they were showing it on the ancient aliens, right, they were saying that when they looked from satellite down, there are 7 of those things all in that area.
There's a lot more. There is a lot more. Exactly.
Carl, stone.
Stone. Right. Okay. Before we have our break now, I would like to mention that you're all invited to our sex, debauchery and Saturnalia lecture to look at the origins of Christmas, 25th of December in Barry, 1:30. 22nd of December at 1:30 on a Sunday in Barry for 2 hours. Wine and mince pies are offered, and debauchery is optional.
How much is that?
It's a £5.
It's an extra, is it?
Well, that's cheap.
Well, no, we give you the money back.
I don't want the money back.
Well, okay, you can pay for debauchery if you want. Anne's going and she's going to take a luminescent thong.
What time is it?
It's at 1:30 at St Nicholas Community Hall. If you're interested, let me know next week.
Oh, I've got to tell you, I don't know when to tell you this. It's something sad.
Right, I tell you what, tell us the sad thing when I've just finished my announcements. Right.
When you finish what?
When I've finished my announcement. So obviously, those that are interested, Anne's coming to our bender on the 28th of December, which is a Saturday, at 6:30 at Langan. Which Anne's going to say she can't make it now, and that's the bad news. And also, if anyone's interested, we've got a nice walk of the archaeology and quarrying and all the rest of it of Lantwick Major tomorrow at 1 o'clock. Meet at the train station. If you want to make it tomorrow, then it's 1 o'clock, train station, Lantwick Major. Are there any questions?
St. Nicholas Community Hall.
St. Nicholas Community Hall in Barry.
I went to one time on the corner, sort of. And
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's the one. That's the one. Okay, Anne, tell us the bad news.
Well, it's about Dorothy.
Right, actually, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get this off recording now. Hang on. No, hang on. I've got to get this off a minute. I've got to get this
No,
off.
it's not Dorothy.
I'm getting this off.
Right.
Him out of what? Right, next on to the Alberto Ruz. There he is. And if you look at the if you look at the headdress here, on the stone headdress, which is meant to be a representation of Pakal himself.
Why did you put it on the ledge like that?
I actually thought that as well. He's an archaeologist, Bill. Do you know any archaeologists with common sense?
Strange. Odd.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's posed for the picture.
Yeah, he's posing for the picture. Right, like none of us are posers. Right? Oh, you should have seen me in this hustings, right? None of the other candidates had a word in edgeways except my mate Alan.
Oh, Alan can't.
Yeah,
Alan?
me and Alan.
You didn't like Alan Arms. You told me you pasted stuff everywhere.
Yeah, I have.
I was telling Alan that.
I couldn't look him in the face. Yeah, but to prove to you, right? There you go, right? There, Alan Carnes' number.
Oh, you little bitch. Sorry, that was a bit forward. But no, you've always said you can't stand that man.
You know, in politics, we're as yeah.
Two-faced as they come.
Yeah, exactly. Hooray! Right.
She's going home again.
No! Can we just get on with this blinking thing, Alberto Ruz? Right, okay. So,
Lost.
no, she hasn't got lost.
It's called gospel, that's all.
And that's all. Christ almighty. Oi, shut up! Thank you. Pakal was buried in a colossal sarcophagi in the largest of Palenque stepped pyramidal structures. It wasn't the largest structure there, but it was the most impressive one as we've already seen. So if we can actually get back to that image and set the scene. Anyway, that's the true embodiment of what Pakal looked like. And if we go back to, there you go, that's the building. And that is actually the room, the actual burial chamber itself. Look at that there. So this was actually laying level on the ground. And look at this stone sarcophagi here with this wonderful lid. So it's actually a small area. It's quite a small area, and obviously the building that we're looking at is this building here. So this is the building, the House of the 9 Sharpened Spears. So you can think steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's the steps. So this is known as the Temple of the Inscriptions. Though Palenque had been examined by archaeologists before, the secret to opening his tomb was nobody had a clue. It was so obvious to Alberto Ruz when he was excavating there, and all the little holes had been plugged off, as we mentioned. So he discovered this in 1948. But like all good archaeologists, didn't make it public for another year. He sat on his information, right? Because we do this. So it took him 4 years then to clear all the rubble, leading down the stairwell into Pakal's tomb. Finally reaching Pakal's tomb in 1952. His skeletal remains were still lying in his coffin, wearing a jade mask and bead necklaces, surrounded by sculptures that we've already seen. So basically, this isn't everything that was found in it, but these beautifully these are actually carved out of one stone. These individual ones. So and it's beautiful. And when he looked in there, right, I've got the description. We'll come up towards the end. There were stalagmites and stalactites in there. He thought it was like a grotto, but we'll mention that in a short while. So his skeletal remains were still lying in his coffin, wearing a jade mask and bead necklaces, surrounded by sculptures and stuccos. Traces of pigment show that these were once colourfully painted, common of much Mayan sculpture at that time. This was all painted and it was completely sealed in. So whatever organic substance that they used had obviously, with bacteria, just dissolved. Well, and this is the thing. We'll come on to this when we're coming to it. Whether the bones in the tomb are really those of Pakal is under debate, or was under debate. Because why? The wear on the teeth was not wear of somebody who was 80. Was actually wear of somebody in their 40s. But before my nan didn't have dentures, right? She had her own teeth, right? I remember looking at her early no, she passed away this year. Look at her beginning of the year, and her teeth were still really good, in really good condition. 100% better than my teeth, right? 101. 101% better than my teeth. So there's a point there. So the teeth were of somebody in their 40s. Pakal was 80 at the age of death. Epigraphers insist that the inscriptions on the tomb indicate there is indeed Pakal. All the inscriptions there say it's Pakal, it's Pakal, it's Pakal. Okay? But there was still some doubts. Some contest that the glyphs refer to two people with the same name, and they were saying, oh, this is Pakal too. Right? And then they started doubting the Mayan calendar, and they said, oh, actually, maybe when you look at the Mayan calendar, when it's talking about a year, it's referring to, in fact, start again. When it's referring to 2 years, it's in fact referring to a year. So, when you look at the calendar, it might be saying end of year 1, well, that's end of the summer, and then the next bit is year 2 and end of year 2. Put that together, that's 1 year. But if you read it, if you read it in the Mayan calendar, it might say 80 years, but if you read it in our calendar, it'd be 40 years. That's a suggestion. That's not what the case is, actually. But some people actually thought that, and that's an interesting point. There's an interesting point to be made there. When we look at the period from the Roman civilization collapsing in Britain and the Roman civilization collapsing in the West in 476, you've nearly got 600 years until 1066, and in that period, trying to find evidence anywhere in Britain is really difficult. And some people have said the reason why it's really difficult, if you're looking for buildings built over 600 years, you're not going to find them, because in fact that period wasn't 600 years long at all. It was 300 years long, right? That's what some people have argued. They've said that radiocarbon dating evidence is wrong. So in fact it's a shorter period. If you condense it all in, it makes that period between the Romans and the Norman period making a lot more sense. So they're saying that's what's happening over there as well, okay? That's what's happening over there. Their dating system's wrong, so everything's longer than it should be. That's what they're saying. However, that's clearly not the point. Anyway, so if we move on a little bit further, we'll come on to what all this means in a short while. So, hang on, let's just let's get another image. There they all are. Oh God, I can't enlarge this one. There they all are. So you look at the stairs are this way, right? You come down the stairs down here, and they're actually, that is the stone sarcophagus lid, and here's the back of the burial chamber. It's quite small, but it's all intact. That's the point. So anyway, I've got to get to my. So we got that, and there he is. There's Alberto Ruz with his excavation team. It's great. It's mainly all Mexican excavation team, and there's Alberto's. That's where he's buried. So this is. You see the difference between Tutankhamun and Howard Carter. Howard Carter will never be buried outside Tutankhamun.
That's unusual to be buried on an archaeologist's site.
That's how special he was.
Legal implications and all that.
It's out there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's out there. Yeah, he was the responsible for the finding. Yeah, and that it may not look big, but that's the length of his body. That's the length of his body, and that's where he's buried, and that is there. In other words, the bones of Pakal are still there.
Yeah.
Alberto's there, and that is like amazing. That is such an honour for an archaeologist, right? It's an absolute honour. But
And you could visit the site?
yeah, you can visit Palenque. It's one of those sites that you can visit.
You could go down into where the bones are?
What's that?
Go down where the bones are?
You can go down. You can go down where the bones are, but there's obviously a guide there to make sure you don't sort of interfere with any of the bones. So he's this great sort of builder, and there's lots of references on monuments and texts to Pakal. So he's a real figure. We know he existed. And what I'm going to do now is go on to the end bit. George, it's only 6:22.
Bloody toilet. Do I have to say excuse me, miss?
Yeah.
May I leave the room?
Yeah, you can say that as long as you say miss. If you said mister, I'd be really insulted.
Yeah, I'm sure you would.
George, you know that dress you borrowed last week? Can I have it back, please?
No, it's been ripped.
Oh, it's ripped off him.
Yes, exactly.
You
So
bitch.
excited.
Yeah, I know you were. I don't know. There's no comeback from that, is there? Right.
I think so, yeah.
Who is buried in Pakal's tomb? So we'll do this entire article. It goes back and forth and we come to a conclusion, right? So discovery of the sarcophagus of a great Mayan ruler deep within the temple of the inscriptions of Palenque. That's one of the facts. We know he's there, right? End of story. We know he's actually buried there. Somebody's buried there. It's a famous person. So whether you've got any doubts as Pakal, somebody famous is buried there anyway. So Alberto Ruz had long wrestled with an enigma involving this pyramid. No one
no one had been able to explain why there were holes in the flagstone floor and why they'd been filled in. So Ruz just said, well, I'm going to lift up the flagstone. Finally, Ruz noticed that the walls of the temple continued beneath floor level, and he suddenly realized that the ancient man had sealed off a chamber below. So this is, they had deliberately sealed it off. Lowering the final slab into place with ropes through drill holes, they had sealed the holes with stone plugs. So he decided to go down those steps. I know I'm repeating some of the stuff. He decided to go down the steps. He spent 4 seasons digging down beneath the floor of the Temple of the Inscriptions. It was stuffingly hot and dangerous work. At last, in the summer of 1952, Ruz... Now, this is a familiar story. George?
Yes.
Right. And Bill? What does this sound like? He shined his flashlight through a peephole that his workers had cut through the limestone.
Carter.
Tutankhamun. Both of you had it right.
Of course we did.
100%. 100%. It's almost as if he thought, right, this is going to be my Tutankhamun, yeah? So, a peephole that his workers had cut through the limestone. Tutankhamun all over. As he later described the site. So, here we go. Let's describe the site. The site is, and here we go. He goes on. Oh, there it is. We're going to read this one out by you. He goes... Out of the dim shadows emerged a vision from a fairy tale, a fantastic, ethereal sight from another world. It seemed a huge magic grotto carved out of ice, the walls sparkling and glistening like snow crystals. Delicate festoons of stalactites hung like tassels of a curtain, and the stalagmites on the floor looked like dripping from the great candle.
So this was a stone tomb, wasn't it?
Yes.
It's obviously the limestone.
Yeah, because of the stalagmites.
And this the great age of it.
Exactly.
To have stalactites just after 1,500 years is unusual, isn't it?
Like these ones, quite extraordinary. Quite extraordinary. These wouldn't have formed immediately either. The impression is, in fact, was that of an abandoned chapel underground. Across the walls marched stucco figures in low relief. Then my eye sought the floor. So what? It would be good. You don't really need to read this. I'm reading this. So if we go back to that image within, there we go. So you can get an idea where he's looking at. Except that's actually over the body and it's down. So you've got the stuccos there.
The technical point, Carl.
Please don't do what I think you're going to say.
Oh, well,
go on, go for it.
Keep quiet then.
No, do it.
Was that stone cut within?
No.
It was dragged in some way or another.
Oh no, no, it couldn't have been. It's built there first and the temple's built over.
Yeah, but...
It's all cut stone, isn't it?
It's all cut stone, yeah.
I'm with you, yeah.
Yeah, it's not like the Great Pyramids where they reckon that this was moved in there through tight holes and all the rest of it, right? They did it the way that things are meant to be built there and build things around it. But that leads us with a question. Leads us with a very, very good question. He must have known his days were up because his body, his bones were all intact. So they couldn't have had him waiting around and say, we'll bury him 10 years time. He must have known this was happening, right? So basically, this slab itself almost fills the whole room. It's a wonderful carved slab. You can sort of read around the edge. That's if you look around the edge. For the first time in more than 1,000 years, human eyes beheld the glorious carved sarcophagus lid of a great ruler of Palenque. That the tomb belonged to an important ruler was beyond doubt, considering its magnificence. The entire pyramid of the Temple of Inscriptions had been built around it. But who was this ruler? People argued and started to question. So basically, the analysis of the sarcophagus lid tells us that the inscriptions determine that this lid itself and some of the cartouches is actually for Pakal. Now, for Pakal doesn't mean to say it is Pakal. Pakal, the great ruler of Palenque, ruled for about 80 years, so he'd have had loads of time to build his own monument. He could have said, right guys, we'll build a bit every year, and he could have had it built in 10 years anyway. He ruled for 68 years.
You need his body under there somehow.
All right, that would have gone down the steps.
Yeah.
Oh, down
Yeah,
the
then
steps.
they filled it in.
Yeah, then
that's a good one.
they filled it all in. Then they filled it all in. Yeah, filled it all in after.
Unless they laid in there like those people do, those Buddhist people, and they sit in a hole and they're fed and then they slowly withdraw.
Oh, the ones that the ones that eat the bark and yeah.
They slowly, they're in a
That's
little
a great-
hole.
Some
Yeah.
slowly mummify themselves. Yeah.
Unless you did that,
But,
Yeah. Meanwhile, epigrapher scholars who have studied and interpreted inscriptions have determined definitely the dates of Pakal's birth and his death. So we got definites there. If we look at the Mayan calendar, apparently in power, at least in name, by the age of 12, he ruled for almost 70 years. And we know all that from the inscriptions. Yet the controversy is raised over the epigraphal findings, the writing, and then the carvings. Can we believe the carvings? It's not archaeology, because carvings might mean one thing, and to others they might mean another thing. But here's two interesting things. They both contradict, right? So here we go. First things first. The last argument against the chronology is that some way the epigraphers do not understand what the Maya intended to say. For example, two people are being named as one person. So maybe that person buried in there is another Pakal. For example, the history could be a complete fabrication. Maybe the Mayans fabricated it all. Or that some special way of dealing with time was being used, as I said. Summer is 1 year and winter's another. So that means that for a Mayan that's 2 years, for us it's 1, right? So that could mean he's just 40 years old. Historical glyphs, so if you're doubting the Mayan calendar, right, you're doubting everything that's been written about by the Central Americans about their entire history, including the moment when they even wrote about the conquistadors getting there in 1522. Because even some of them, there were still Mayans around by the time the conquistadors got there, and they were still using a calendar. They wrote the conquistadors have turned up. So what you do, you count from when the conquistadors arrived all the way back, and then you can work out when Pakal turned up. All that calendar works, right? So the other people are saying, right, instead of doubting this, for our part, we have always maintained that the arithmetic involved in analysing the inscription dates is smack on the money. Whether or not our proposed interpretation of specific events are overturned or not, there's no ambiguity. The Mayans believed in a long calendar of not a year, a calendar that went on for 375,000 years. They had the calendar that they had put in place. And they also tied in his birth and accession dates. And everything goes into the calendar. And we know one set event is 1522. And if you put 1522 and you work back, the calendar makes sense. So the final thing is, right, so we don't doubt the calendar. Is it Pakal buried inside? And finally, it's thought a dentist who had worked extensively with the Smithsonian Institute in America, which is the elite university in America, a forensic analysis on teeth. This expert, Alan Christensen, said, "Wear is not a factor in elite dentition, as they likely had a diet that had softer food when they were eating." So in other words, somebody who's rich is not really going to have a coarse diet. But there's a very important point in the next and last paragraph of today to prove that this is Pakal. Listen to this. And you all know somebody who fits into this category of young bones. An expert from America also said, he said, people who survive to advanced age in any population naturally have young bones compared to their contemporaries. These survivors do not age as rapidly as other members of the same population, so they might look younger to physical anthropologists assessing their age from skeletal remains. In other words, you can have a young set of remains, but the person might be in their 80s. And I'll give you one example of this, and Glenda's going to give me one example. I know people who used to go to the same school as me, and they're the same age as me, right? And I say to Michelle, I say, that person over there was in the same class as me. And she said, he looks absolutely ancient. And I say to my children, I used to be in the same class as that person. I say, they look a lot older than you, Dad, right? And so I'm not saying I've got young bones, but I look a lot younger than lots of those people that were in my class, right? Give me an example, Glenda, of somebody who's old but looks extremely young. You must know someone.
Who's old that looks extremely young. Well, there was, I don't know this person, but it was on telly last night, the night before. She had her 100th birthday and her sister was with her, and she was 108. Now, the lady looks 100.
Yes.
She looks about 75.
I noted that,
she?
yes.
Yeah.
Mark.
And yeah, her sister, 108, looked 108.
Yeah.
Seriously, she looked like, you know. But the one that was 100 was seriously young looking. And she was happy and like that. And she'd done a lot in her life, hadn't she?
Bingo. That's the point. You can't grow old like that to 100 without having young bones.
I suppose old bones are those bones who've got like this.
Yes.
And also
Exactly.
people that have got a distress in life. Have had a lot of
Look at Anne.
things wrong.
Yeah.
Had a lot of things going on and that, and then burden. If you've had a lot of burdens.
My mother-in-law is very young, really.
Yeah.
In that, you know, I think she's younger than I am, you know, in many ways.
That's the point.
Yeah.
So in other words, this is Pakal. Are there any questions?
No, I just think that with his teeth thing, he could have good teeth.
Yeah.
You know, people have got good teeth when they're getting older.
My nana's. I put it this way. I've lost a lot of my teeth, but
I got quite
We
good
didn't
teeth.
have the sweets and things when we, you know, like we did.
But yeah, and people have certain things.
you're not going yet, George. You?
Yeah,
It's 4:36.
Hey? Yeah.
He's got to walk down to the best.
Okay, fair enough. Any questions?
Out all day since
Bill.
9 o'clock.
Any questions?
it's 9 o'clock.
Tables out to the edge of the table.
Oh yeah, they were like this.
Yeah, it's just
Just these two, that one's okay.
Okay then, folks. If there's no more questions, thank you very much. Next week we're doing the archaeology of the he she. Thank you very much.
What's he she?
Male, female.
Just the edge.
It's about time we did one, isn't it?
That's how we found
Basically, yeah.
Take care, mate.
Bye, Glenda. See you after Christmas. Yeah. Oh, why? You know, Gallivant again. Yes.
Bill, are you having another mince pie?
No,
What?
he's staying here.
Say to Bill, right, we're taking the
Bye, Anne.
and on the 20, no, what's the
Thank you,
last
bye,
one
Jimmy.
we're having, the Thursday?
Second.
No,
We're back on the second.
the very last one we had.
It's the 20th, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
18th, yeah.
Bring a bit of a buffet in.
All right then. That'll be good.
It's a bit
Charles, I'll see you next week.
Del said he couldn't come to all this, so we'd like to do something. So I suggested we have a bit of a buffet instead of, you know, some sandwiches. And if you
I won't be
carry
there.
it with you. Yeah? You won't be here. God. You keep saying I won't be here. I keep saying when you come. You won't be here.
Yeah, it goes on a bit long, really. I think we could finish next week, really.
Why?
Everyone got to do.
Oh, the door's open. I've got loads of business. The door open.
You've got to get away from them.
Well, no, starting on Friday then. The next day our Richard comes and goes on the Saturday. And then Christmas
Oh, that. It's a bit of doggy. Right, just have these mince pies. I love mince pies.
We should buy some next week for us all. That went quiet then, didn't it?
What's happening? Where the box? They'll be okay.
I know they'll be okay.
Where's Bill? Oh, he's outside, I guess. He likes his well.
We need some ginger nuts.
Ginger.
Oh, I'm going to give Kat some and
No, you don't
Hey.
have to.
But,
Thank you for the dinner.
Oh, right, you're not here anymore.
You don't have to, man.
I do. Yeah.
Is he not? We're not seeing him then?
No,
Where are you going, babe?
Europe?
babe.
Oh, right. You're going to Europe before we leave on the 31st of this month.
I don't leave anyway because I've got the European passport.
Oh, right, yeah, you are.
There you go.
I'm looking forward to us leaving this horrible Europe once and for all.
I want to be in Europe. You want to be in Europe? Yeah. You want to be
Well, being in Europe tells us that as a country we're unable to support ourselves, which we are.
No, and Europe has really gone down in my estimation.
Why is that?
Alan Carnes.
But me and Alan are best mates.
That's what I'm worried about.
Hang on a minute, is that my money, Bill?
Yeah.
Oh, bloody hell, that's my money.
You're not a real Welsh bloke.
Who isn't?
You.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh.
Support Alan Carnes.
Alan, we love Alan.
Sorry.
Alan!
Have a good Christmas.
Do you know what, Bill? I love winding people up. It's great.
I hope you get your heating sorted before Christmas Day.
oh yeah.
Where are you going anyway?
Going to Belgium for the markets.
Oh, my sympathy.
Yeah.
Do you want to buy some books?
And then down in Southampton with the daughters doing Christmas for us. So they got heating.
Thank you for that. I will go down anyway.
I will do.
So when you go to France, do they call you Henri? Henri! La 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 la.
Enjoy yourself.
Oh, I will. No doubt we'll have some more merchandise for you. Oh, Bill, there's a bin, yeah?
I know, you'll have to wait another year.
Oh, Carl, you can have those, right?
Bill!
I'll take these, should I?
Yeah, go on then.
Okay.
Oh, I'll have, no, you have them, that's fine. What we could do is have blow-up rubber dolls with Archaeology Company logos on. Anne's got a blow-up rubber doll of me in a bedroom. Anne's got a blow-up rubber doll of me in a bedroom.
I don't disbelieve it.
Pardon?
I don't disbelieve it.
I don't disbelieve it either.
Right.
The thing is, Anne's got a great love for me, she has. What's that? Hey, Aubrey! I gotta say goodbye to you, Aubrey!
Is that what you meant? The madhouse here.
Yeah.
The bathhouse here.
I can't believe he's in the Alan Carnes. Off his 2 years I've known him, and now he's mates with him.
There must be some financial advantage.
Something, isn't it? Something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, did he?
So I'm going to follow up on that.
Oh God.
You know, most people think I'm nuts.
You are.
Well, do you think I'm nuts, Bill?